Hi, today's video is all about 3 years since this was announced and released, the Sony A7IV. I've been using it for about 2.5 years, so this is my thoughts on it and my long-term review. Now it's probably coming to the end of its life. I say end of life, it's still a good camera, but they're likely to release an update within the next year anyway. So here we go. Okay, I'll start off with the body. I did put a cage on it because I dropped it actually when I first bought this camera. I've left a small mark there, but it held up, it's got no real damage. I've also put a screen protector on it as well, but that's just standard, same kind of thing you do with your phone. So it's got all the ports you need. It's got USB-C for charging. It's got a headphone out port, got a microphone in port, and something very important to me, it's got a full-size HDMI port, which is very, very handy. On the other side, you have two ports. They can either take SD cards or one is an SD card and CF Express A, not B, which is a lot cheaper. So I just use it for standard SD cards, but I make sure I use V90 cards because they're much faster. And you have the standard layout buttons on the top and back. Nice thing about this camera though is they're very customizable. So I've changed what is usually the aperture, which is usually at the front. I've actually changed it to the back here. So now I use the front one for shutter speed, which is handy when you're changing from 60 frames a second. There's no shutter angle on this camera, so you'll need to change the shutter speed. I actually use it at 50, so I use 25 frames a second for my standard and 50 frames a second for my high speed recording. Something that was added on this camera, which I think is absolutely brilliant, is the switch that goes from photo to video to slow and quick, which is great because you can retain the settings you had previously, except for the shutter speed, which is a little bit annoying. Then when you go slow and quick, it's going to keep the same shutter speed as you had on video. So if you're running at say 25 frames a second, as I would, you're going to have the shutter speed as 1/50, and then if you want to go at 50 frames a second, you want it 1/100, and so that can be a little bit of a problem there sometimes, because then you might get jittery effects or too much blur or something like that, depending on whether the shutter speed is too high or too low. But apart from that, that switch is absolutely genius and it saves a lot of time. One thing I do wish when they bring out the A7V is to actually add shutter angle. Let's say sorry about the clicking in this video. I've got some strap locks on it, so occasionally it seems to be hitting the body and clicking, so I do apologise in advance. This camera's got the newer file system they brought in with this camera and a couple of others. The older menus in say the A6400 were much harder, so once they introduced the new menu on this camera, it's much better. It's still lots in it and still quite hard to find things, but it's not the worst I've seen. But it's definitely a huge improvement on their old menu. One setting I did change when I was setting up in the menu was the overheating. So if you put it onto a higher temperature setting, then it's less likely to overheat. The camera will get warmer, but you are less likely to overheat. The only actual time I did have the overheating warning come on and ready for it to overheat was actually going through the menus when I first got this camera. Going into the menus makes it really hot, and I don't know why. And I saw quite a few other people had this problem. I think it was on the original version of the software. When you were first setting it up and going through the menus, for some reason it got really, really hot. After that, I've never had a problem. I've used it in subtropics in southwest Japan and never had a problem with it. And I was running for ages. I was running on a gimbal, lots of other things, never had an overheat warning, which is quite surprising because it was very hot and very humid. Though I did turn the heat off and I made sure that the back door was open. That also helps it to cool down. And now you have products such as the Ulanzi cooling fan, which also help. But generally speaking, I've never had a problem with overheating. Though I did have one problem where the connections to the lens, got those little points where it connects to the lens, they had moisture, I guess, through the humidity, and it stopped the autofocus working at some point, then stopped the actual camera seeing the lens. All I did was turn it off, cleaned it up, and it worked again. It's the only actual problem I've had with the camera not working properly. That, and just reminded myself, is sometimes when you've got the screen open and you look in the viewfinder, it doesn't always see your face close by. So the viewfinder doesn't work, and I find that you have to switch off the camera and switch that back on just to reset it so it actually sees your eye again. It's a little niggling fault that I've found on mine, but that could be just my copy, I'm not sure. And it doesn't happen all the time, it's only now and again. It's quite a big camera, quite heavy, but still a lot lighter and smaller than some of its competitors. I've got the Sigma 28-70 on here, which I find is quite good for a light travel setup or just street photography, something like that. Obviously the 24-70 is better, but I like lighter. To be honest, I'm even tempted to get the 24-50, as it might be even lighter still. So the main selling point for this camera is it's a great hybrid camera, and that's my main reason for having it. Sony do great video cameras, great photography cameras, but this is an all-rounder. And when I first got this camera, my main focus was on both photography and video. So I'm just going to start with photos. It takes raw photos quite slowly, so most people are going to shoot with RAW. You can then manipulate it in programs. It can be quite slow for sport and wildlife. At full RAW, it only takes pictures at 6 frames per second. If you use compressed RAW, it's 10 frames per second. I mean, personally speaking, it's quick enough for me because I don't take amazing pictures, but if you were taking a bird that you really need to get that fast frame rate, you're probably better off getting a dedicated camera, but they can be lots more expensive, such as the Sony A7IV. Picture quality of the photos are really good. The sensor in this is 33 megapixels, which makes a big difference coming from a 24 megapixel camera. You can crop in a lot more, so if you do take a picture and you just want to zoom in a little bit more, especially with birds and things like that, this is great for that. And you've got a lot of quality if you want to do prints. Pretty decent IBIS in it. It's got 5.5 stops. It's not as much as more later cameras that have got higher IBIS levels, though in video I do find it going a little bit warpy in the corners. It's extremely good in low light, especially in video. If you put it into S-Log3, you have 2 base points of ISO, 800 and 3200. So it is very good for low light, especially videography. With photography, obviously going into different ISO points will introduce more noise, but it's not too bad. And I've found it very good for low light photography as well, especially if you use a fast prime lens. So you also, because of the high megapixel in video, not so much in photography, but you can do it, is you can go into a crop sensor mode, which is about 16 megapixels, and that's very good for taking video if you need to push in a bit. Though one problem with that is higher frame rates, you have no choice. The back screen I'm not a big fan of. It's quite a low megapixel count. I think it's 1.2 megapixels or something like that, and it could be better. The viewfinder is better. I can't remember how many megapixels it off the top of my head, so I'll put it here. Definitely good enough, and it compares with other models in this range. But the back screen, Sony really needs to improve that, which is very frustrating, seeing they make TVs and smartphones with much better screens, and all their cameras. So lenses, I'm using the Sigma as I said on it now, but there's so many lenses. You've got obviously the Sony lenses from the G Master down to the cheaper range. Then you have third-party lenses. You've got big ones from Sigma and Tamron, but you've also got other lens makers such as Samyang are improving all the time, and a lot of the Chinese brands are getting better and better and better. Plus you can adapt vintage lenses, which I'm a big fan of, so you've got so much choice for lenses. It really makes a system for me. You can also adapt PL mount, so there is a lot of options for this camera. So the battery in this, which is one of these, is the MP FZ100 battery. These are great. They last for hours. It's rare that I need to change them. Some good points and bad points. Starting with the good points, it's a lovely image. It's downsampled from 7K down to 4K, so you get a very, very sharp image. Obviously you've seen a lot of examples while I've been doing this video, but a very sharp image with this. The problems I find is when you go to higher frame rates, so say 60 or 50 frames per second, it will crop into an APS-C crop, which normally is okay if you're just going to film on that mode. But if you want to suddenly slow down the footage, you are going to get that crop, so you're going to have to move, then you're going to get a different depth of field, etc. Very rarely found it frustrating. If anything, when I'm using it for recording wildlife or something like that, that extra crop factor is more of a help than a hindrance, I often find. But it's there, and there's not much you can do to change it, I'm afraid. Now I'm going to talk about some of the problems I've had with this. Mostly it's been very positive. The image is great, lovely camera. It's the perfect hybrid camera for its time, though there are newer cameras that might improve on that now. I'll look a bit more at that at the end. But just generally, it's a really good camera for recording video, talking head things like this. I've used it for tons of videos. It's very good for wildlife video, for street, all different kind of things. The IBIS can be very wobbly sometimes, which is very annoying. Mixed with the rolling shutter, that can be extremely annoying. So you do get the wobbles if you're shaking a bit too much. It's not Panasonic levels of stabilization, but for Sony it's not too bad. I've never really had any faults with the camera. It's been pretty solid. I've used it in rain sometimes. I've used it in all weather conditions, from extreme heat to cold and snow. So never had a problem there. Sony can improve on though is updating the cameras. I'm not one to buy a camera and expect loads of updates afterwards. I want to buy the hardware. I know what I've got and I know what I'm going to get. Though, in this day and age, I think it's something Sony needs to look at, is pushing more updates onto this. They've done quite a few. It's not a big complaint, but that's something I'd improve on. Handling, so I've got quite small little hands, so the size of this camera is absolutely perfect for me. It's not too bad at all, to be honest. Weight's okay. It's a little bit heavier because I put a cage on it, but that's only because I likely to drop it and it protects it a bit. And it's good for rigging up. If I do some video, I don't rig it up much, but I might put a microphone on there or a monitor or something like that. So it's good for that too. What I think Sony should improve for the A7IV when it comes out. So I think they should improve these things. As I've said many times, screen resolution. It needs better screen resolution for both the viewfinder and the back screen, but especially the back screen. That needs improved a lot. If they can make it slightly bigger and more touchscreen features, that'd be great. AI autofocus chip, that will go in there. Pretty much say that's a given that you're going to get AI autofocus chip in this. Some of the fun options that ZV-1 has, such as auto framing and cinema mode, if they put some of those options in the camera, that'd be good fun in the future. I think it'll have the same 33 megabit sensor, which is fine. I don't think they need to improve that, but if they can improve the readout speed, so no rolling shutter, and a big one so it doesn't crop in at 60 frames a second, that will be a huge improvement when the A7V comes out. If I could put 120 frames a second slow motion mode in, that'd be really good as well in 4K. So now this is an older camera. You do have other options such as the Nikon Z6 Mark III, and you do get a lot, especially RAW in video mode, and also they have some amazing lens as well with Nikon cameras. Very tempting actually. The Panasonic S5 II and the S5 IIX, more video options, and you've also got the Canon R6 Mark II, which is that lovely Canon color science. Doesn't have the choice of lenses, but it's got some very nice video features, and it doesn't crop in when you're recording at 60 frames a second, which is a bugbear for me and a lot of other people. Not a huge one, not bother me as much, but using now other cameras where you can go straight to 120 frames a second with an extremely small crop, I think Sony need to improve that. And I think it was due to the sensor speed. That's why they did it. The rolling shutter would have been virtually impossible and probably would have overheated straight away as well. Okay, thank you very much. That's my views on the Sony A7IV after 2.5 years of use and 3 years being available. I still think it's a very capable camera. I don't think it's one worth just selling if you already own it, or just wait a little bit longer for the A7V to come out. For now, still very happy with the A7IV. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope to see you again in my next one. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.
剣道の動きってそうでしょこれで使っても出るわけですよ